Okay, welcome to Conversations with John Harper, More Than Meets the Eye, which is part of an ongoing series. My name is Rez Huseyin. I'm a student of the Diamond Approach, a spiritual path that I discovered through my work with the Enneagram. I'm joined by John Harper, Diamond Approach teacher, Enneagram guide, and author of 3 books, most recently Nurturing Essence, A Compass for Essential Parenting. John, I know we said last time that I would ask you questions about your process and journey today, but as it happens, I'm kind of itching to talk about a different matter. So I was wondering if you'd mind if we deferred on that.
Hey, you're the boss.
Oh, great. I'm not going to forget because there's a real value in hearing the stories and the personal element with teachers, especially now that spiritual knowledge is becoming so available. So I won't forget. But the burning sort of topic is narcissism and its responsiveness to development work, which is not particularly a new preoccupation for me, but it came to the fore again this week after I was sent an article by a researcher and teacher who has done a lot of work on Enneagram and narcissism. Um, yeah, so what got me excited, John, is he claims that the presence of narcissistic traits survives psychospiritual development. And to be clear, his view of development is not informed by the Diamond Approach. He's not a Diamond Approach student. And I've been thinking a lot about it, and I have some questions I would like to put to you. I'm not going to ask you to teach the point, or because not least because I haven't received this teaching yet in my group, but I would like to talk broadly about narcissism and development.
When you refer to the point, you're talking about true identity, what Almaas calls the point of existence. You know, we use the point shorthand for, something pretty radical.
Yeah, and I was going to say one of us, and I'm happy to do it, needs to set this up by defining psychological or personality narcissism and spiritual narcissism. So the view of the Diamond Approach, they're distinct. Do you want me to do it, or do you want to do it?
Well, I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, so what I'm calling psychological or personality narcissism is just the kind that everyone seems to know about. So traits, so lacking empathy, transactional view of relationships, exaggerated self-centeredness, delusions of grandiosity, masking, that sort of thing. And then narcissism from the perspective of the Diamond Approach is just simply identification with self-image rather than being. And from that perspective, the Enneagram's very relevant because the Enneagram is basically a map of narcissistic alienation.
I agree.
Yeah, do you see a connection between, or a relationship between personality narcissism, as in the prevalence of narcissistic traits, and then narcissism from the perspective of the Diamond Approach?
Well, everyday narcissism, what you're calling psychological narcissism, is when we're taking ourselves to be something other than what we really are. So, the main ingredient in that, of course, is this constructed sense of self and our identification with that familiar sense of self. And this is something that develops in the first few years of life, which is critical to function in this world. And that is the capacity for self reflection. But that self reflection functions mainly within the realm of the personality of the constructed self. So we are constantly reflecting back into our experience and creating a story around it and a a universe, a constellation of existence around it that is giving it agency and existence, which it doesn't have because that construct is just a mental construct. So the key ingredient in narcissism is the self-centeredness in that type of self-reflection. Okay? And then in narcissism, that gets exaggerated, and the more it's exaggerated, it'll turn pathological because nothing else matters other than the self-reflection, the self-centeredness. Everything else is pushed away. Empathy, consideration for others, you just run the gamut of grandiosity and arrogance and entitlement, all those elements that we know. Now, everybody that's living, well, there may be some percentage of 1% aren't affected by narcissism. They've worked through it all, but for for statistically, 100% of people suffer from narcissism. Suffer is not the right word. They have some form of narcissism to some degree or other.
You said everyday narcissism, but actually Almaas defines that as I think that's his narcissism. I'm pretty sure that's the terminology he uses in the point, is the everyday narcissism is the narcissism we all share where we're identified with something other than being. Yeah, I think when you use the term, you refer to the narcissism that the world knows or understands, which
Yes.
also it could be called everyday narcissism, but I just wanted to, I
The thing about
definitely,
narcissism that one should keep in mind, okay? The most painful experience that a human being can have is to experience the pain of separation from being. So the work on narcissism and the functioning of narcissism is a way of not experiencing that pain, trying to cope with it, adapt to it, figure out a way around it. And the more narcissistic we become, uh, all of that is around avoiding this existential non-existence within us. You know, it's not just our constructed self, because the constructed self is just a bunch of memory. Okay? But that memory, that pain exists within the psychic and physicalness of the body. And it remembers that, it knows that. It's never far away from it because it's at the core of this ego structure. So when you look at a raging narcissist, of which we have a few examples that are very prominent in the world right now, those individuals, although they're probably, not aware of it at all because they're so busy filling that hole, spending money like crazy, doing power trips, all this stuff. But all of that's being driven to keep them away from the reality of they are existentially empty. And it's extremely painful. It is the worst pain. But only on this side of the dividing line. In the world of the personality and the ego, you have pain and suffering. In the world of being, there is no pain and suffering. So for us as individual consciousnesses, okay, to know pain and suffering, to know the human condition, all the variable possibilities of it, okay, we need to be identified with this human state of consciousness or something like it, something separate from being itself. It's the separateness that creates all the pain and suffering. And that is something that has great preciousness and value, because as one experiences their separation and their pain and their suffering and the world's pain and suffering, it opens the soul up in this incredibly beautiful way, which is, you find a lot of poetry and literature about it, especially in the Sufi lineage.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, John. I'm really glad you spoke to the sort of compassionate perspective on this, because it isn't really reflected in the modern lexicon, shall we say, or the discussion of narcissism, which is pretty slapstick and under nuanced. But I think you were saying earlier that, so the question is the narcissism that everyone understands, the connection of that or the relationship of that to Almaas's narcissism, is just a very pathological, that's a very pathological or extreme alienation from being.
See, I just don't separate it like that. I think that's my issue. Okay, narcissism is narcissism. Okay, it's separation from being. You can look at it through that lens, but it's the same thing, whether it's psychological or existential. Okay, but in the world of a therapist or a psychologist, okay, their main orientation is to help people establish a coherent and functional self. And that work is mainly in the realm of the constructed self. So as they're working with something like narcissism, okay, it's not so much about eradicating narcissism as helping a person land into a state of narcissism that they can be functional in. And part of that function is, knocking some of the edges off it so they can have relationship and interact with other people and not be so self-centered and not be so sociopathic or you know psychotic around the whole thing. uh, you know but in that realm, you're working to you're in collaboration with their false self, you know
Got it. Yeah.
to help it go, okay, yeah, I'm real. And that's important. you know let's just be very clear. If we didn't have all these wonderful therapists and psychologists out there working with this huge mass of humanity, it's gone from like mass neurosis to, it seems to have increased in significant ways, not only with narcissism and sociopathy, but autism and other things are just off the chart. So we need these people and their intelligence and skills to help many people. I'd say all of us, you know, to help find some degree of functionality and well-being within the realm of the structured self, of the ego. So it's very valuable. But again, when you when we when we land in a coherent functional ego that has some solidity to it, some resilience and what have you, that's where the spiritual work begins. We should talk about narcissistic supplies.
Please, let's talk about that. I'm constantly, pretty much constantly thinking about that.
I think it's a kind of a weird and overused concept, and I don't really buy into it to the degree that some of my colleagues do. But it's true. It is a thing. Narcissistic supplies are, well, you look at what does a narcissist want? Okay? Then a narcissist, and we all, as I said, have narcissism, but we're talking about somebody that's a little more extreme, okay, because it highlights the whole thing. Okay? So someone that you would say, boy, they're really a narcissist, okay, they're in touch with this existential emptiness that the mind that functions from either or has basically an either or strategy of how to deal with this. One is I ignore it, I distract myself so that I'm not aware that it's there. And the other thing is I fill up that hole. I fill up that hole. Well, one of the things a narcissist tries to fill that hole up with is mirroring, getting attention from others. And we can see this very plainly in some of the people you see in the news every day, you know, that they have to be the best. They have to have everybody tell them they're the greatest. They have to get this self-reflection, you see. And this can go back to, you talk about the first seven. And this will tie in to the infant's need for mirroring. Right? Right? So this thing that's going on with getting narcissistic supplies, getting reflection that says, I can say you're the greatest, you're the best, but really what I'm saying to this person is my attention is giving you existence. Yes, you're here. Yes, you exist. Yes, okay. That's what's missing. Okay. Is the connection to their sense of existence at a very deep, deep level. Okay. And we all have that disconnection. It's just, we're just not as alienated from it maybe as a raging narcissist is. So narcissistic supplies is just anything I'm doing to try to get reflection to help me bolster up this existential emptiness that's in me, and give me a quick shot of I'm here, I exist. You know, I mean, can you imagine? And we can't. So I don't know even know why I say it, but the amount of energy that goes into a personality structure like that, trying to deal with the most painful experience that's possible for a human being.
Mm.
I mean, losing a child is nothing compared to being separated from being, and losing a child is, you know, something, you know.
Again, I'm really appreciating the compassion. I know that's not what you're trying to do, you're just telling it as it is, but that is the missed perspective on what suffering's not the right word, but what a raging narcissist is dealing with, should we say. Um,
But I should say, on the other side of the dividing line, okay, when you're in the point of existence, right? When you're in a state that is not being patterned by the constructed self and the memory and all that, when you're just in the immediacy of your beingness as that point, that radiant point of existence, okay, that that experience of what the personality experiences as this existential emptiness, okay, is the radiant emptiness of being itself. And in that state, uh, part of what is apprehended or recognized is the infinite, unlimited potentiality of being and all of the possibilities. The pregnancy of being is obvious, even though you're in this amazing, stark emptiness. Okay? That emptiness, you can, you can feel it, in the soul, that everything that comes out of that emptiness. It holds everything. It holds everything that is, has been, and will be. So it's a totally different experience for the soul, for the individual consciousness, and that's again from the perspective of the constructed self. As you get closer and closer to that emptiness that it exists at the core of all egos, you start getting this anxiety, you start getting this fear, and then it turns into terror, because that space represents what is going to dissolve this thing that you've been taking yourself to be, this idea in your mind. It's going to erase all of that. And we're so identified with the body that feeling that dissolution coming is immediately interpreted or to include the death of the body. We're going to die, or my mind is going to die, or I'm going to go crazy, and I'll probably be in some padded cell, being fed baby food the rest of my life. These crazy things, because it feels that real. My existence is going to end. But what's really going to happen is you're going to discover what existence is. And so on this side, it's anxiety, fear, and terror. And on this side, in the experience itself, it's kind of like this same energy, very high, very, incredibly energy, but it's like it quickens the soul. Everything is a zillion points of tingliness or expectation and anticipation, not in the way we think of it in terms of time, okay, anticipating something, but an anticipation that you are standing in, so to speak, the ground of all manifestation, in the emptiness from which everything comes. And that's a damn exciting place to be.
Do you remember when this, the terror and which I've heard other teachers describe and I've read about, I don't think I'm close to sort of that experience. Do you remember going through that?
I don't recall it as an experience of of like walking up to a door and opening it and walking through. I don't recall entering it like that. What I recall is being scared shitless. Okay. And not in the same stream of experience necessarily. It's like I may have worked with some of my teachers or run into things during some of my meditation or whatever where I was approaching that and it was scaring me shitless, you know. And I mean that. That's why I'm using that word. It scares me shitless, you know. Uh, and then there are experiences on the other side. Okay. And then that gives you the comparison. Like, oh, why am I freaking out? But that still doesn't necessarily make it easier to go through that. You have to get acclimated to it. Because again, it goes back to the two heaps.
Mm.
More times I trip in to that. Now, some people trip into it and they seem to just stay there. and and da 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 da. Well, that's not how it happens for most people. It's not how it happens for me. I mean, I'm still back and forth across
Mm.
that wall, but there's enough experience in my soul, okay, that I can sit down and talk to somebody like you, and we start talking about this. I can feel both. Right? Now, I remember being at a summer retreat with Almaas, Hameed Ali, and he went through this thing, and I said to him, because I was doing all the online stuff for the school at that time, and I went up and said, "Hey, can I cut this section of video out? This was great, and post it on YouTube or whatever." And he's sitting up there and he's going, "If I really concentrate, I can remember the time of having ordinary subjective consciousness," or something like that. But he's reaching to, trigger the gray matter to recall that, because he's living in a state where his subjectivity is that everything is within him, the entire universe, you know. And so some people trip into that, and they're just there. And not that he did that, he
Mm.
he had a lot of work that he did, but his consciousness is stabilized. And and then we've talked before, mentioned the total being teachings, right? And from that perspective, it doesn't matter if you're a narcissist or God enlightened or whatever. It's an experience that's being offered up. Okay, the issue is, are you chained to it? Are you identified with it? Are you taking yourself to be that? One can experience the personality without taking themselves to be the personality, right?
Mm.
I mean, what is the personality? It is tendencies and temperament and traits and development, things you've developed, and all of this stuff is part of it. Okay. It's the identification with it that's the problem. It's that this is what I am. And and again, that goes back to the issue of that has no existence. Okay. The sense of existence in it is what is being uh, added by what you are. You are the existence. Okay.
I'm so interested to learn that you flip back and forth, and I guess that's probably true for many people in the work. It's interesting though, isn't it, that you don't stay.
I don't know. It is what it is, you know.
Mm, mm,
And again, going back to the teaching of total being, I just don't have the seeking motivation anymore. I can't say that it's 100% gone. I'm not being dominated by it. If there's something that I want, like I may want a new car, okay, and I may seek that, but and that may be more prevalent than wanting to seek enlightenment, okay, and it's not because enlightenment isn't more valuable and precious than a car. It's that what's happening right here is the doorway into enlightenment. With the car, I probably got to go earn some money and do a few things and get a loan and all that. But as far as enlightenment and connecting to the ground of being, if I'm leaving where I am, you know, I'm not going to find it because it ain't there. It's here.
But that's the end of narcissism right there, though, isn't it, John? So it connects with what you said last week about how originally, when you started spiritual work, you were seeking a perfect technique. That was your narcissistic supplier, right? In a way.
Oh, that I was looking for the key to be a absolute raging narcissist. grandiosity and arrogance and all of that, you know. And I'll tell you, when we did the teaching and the teacher training on narcissism, which really gets down into it, you know, uh, as a student in the school, okay, I think you said you haven't had the teaching on the point yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but you won't have that teaching. Okay? Now, if you decide to take the route of becoming a teacher in the Diamond Approach, you have another week, 8-day, 10-day teaching on narcissism that will go into it much more deeply.
Mm-hmm.
Now, during that teaching, which was taught by Karen Johnson, you know, Hameed's good buddy and co-founder of the Diamond Approach, there was one student in the school that I don't know how it came up. She was up on the stage. I don't even think there was a stage, as it was. Yeah, she was just on a chair up front and 100 people around her. She's doing this teaching, and some fella, she said to him, "Well, what do you want?" And he said, "I want to sit in that chair." And she got up and said, "Well, come on up and sit here," you know. So he came up and sat there, and she went out, and her whole thing was, "How is that?" You know, and he was just this raging, flamboyant manifestation of grandiosity. Okay, and there was such a joy and freedom in him to experience this grandiosity. And in her working with him, what he was able to come to experience is we are something that is grand and absolutely majestic and mind blowing. Okay. And the self can't recreate it. Okay. But it's trying to create it. It's trying to create an image, a facsimile of that kind of grandeur through being a grandiose individual, you know. But that's like, God, you just gotta, you talk about an addiction, you know. Everybody, many people are becoming familiar now with dopamine addiction, this pleasure reward thing that's happening all the time. Okay? And things like grandiosity and arrogance and these things that feed these personality constructs of our, you know, they are much more addictive. We don't see it as an addiction because we take ourselves to be that, right? But we're engaged in this process of getting narcissistic supplies to support that image all the time. So those narcissistic supplies, you know, they you know, you've got the 1 flavor and the 9 flavor and the 4 flavor of the narcissistic supplies. We in each of those enneatypes need a particular flavor of reflection.
Mm.
That is just so fun, you know. How can something that is so friggin' painful be so exciting and fun to explore? Uh, I don't think it is until, you know, you've tripped into the light fantastic a few times.
You don't think it's fun until you've.
No, it's painful, it's suffering,
Yeah,
it's,
right.
you know,
Yeah.
but once a few trips, you know, tripping into reality and being able to discriminate the difference, you know, but it's not all fun. You know, I think of the times I've had about 3 or 4 experiences, 3 that I can remember quite vividly, of experiencing the totality of pain and suffering from time immemorial. It starts with all the pain and suffering that's going on right now, you know, feeling and empathizing. I mean, having it impact your soul, not just your emotional response, but feeling the nature of that violence and suffering that is going on in Ukraine and Gaza and many, many other places. Okay. And dropping below the situational specifics of the different things that are going on, but feeling into the nature of violence and suffering itself, it just feels unbearable. It is unbearable. One can't help, the tears and the sobbing and everything just comes. It is such a phenomenal human experience. Okay. And you think that I can't take this, I can't handle it. And you may bounce out of it or whatever. I guess what happens is you develop the capacity through like work on compassion and other things. You know, what happens is you can't hold it because this constructed self is the one that first reacts and says, I can't handle it. It's too much. I can't handle it. I can't handle it. You know, but your heart will open up and it's extended, it's infinity, and it can hold it all. And it doesn't necessarily lessen the pain and the suffering, okay, but allows you to have the experience of being in touch with what is pain and suffering and violence and exploitation and all of that, in the realm of human experience, right? And to experience yourself, what you really are, this incredible ground, this unity of existence and love and appreciation and compassion for all of that. And yet, what you really are isn't activated to like, I got to go clean all that up, because you can't clean all that up. That's part of what gets created through this thing of being a separate individual. You're never going to clean all that up until the last person is realized. Right? It's the separation. It's this thing that creates this state of narcissism, being independent, separate entity that creates the ground for all of that. So we, we can't create peace by trying to think. That's not to say that we shouldn't work toward having less violence and more peace in the world through the ways that we can, but we are never going to establish the peace of the purity of being and existence that's on the other side of the line. What in the true peace, the peace that comes with being in our nature, you know, because in that nature is the unity. There isn't any strife, you know, and it's a strange thing to look at the world, to experience the world from that place. But the thing that arises with that, well, the thing that's arising right now, arises often, is unimaginable preciousness. Being, reality, the soul, and the life of the ego and personality, all of it is precious beyond imagination.
So in among things you said, I'm grokking that maybe narcissism is, just kind of continues unless, or the point has been realized to the point where,
Well, there are
like,
people that realize the point that are still narcissists.
yeah, that's interesting, isn't it, John? Yeah,
Yeah.
why is that?
You can experience the point without your identity shifting to it.
Mm,
Co-opted into uh, the ego structured self-identity.
right.
Because whenever we experience something, this, see, my earlier path that had to do with out of the body travel, okay,
Oh, is that what that? Can you say the name of that path? Because you said it before, I didn't recognize it.
second car.
Mm-hmm.
So the experience of leaving the body or going to different dimensions or planes of consciousness or however you want to envision that or speak about it. When you come back into the body, okay, your soul is still carrying the vibration of the experience, the in touchness with it. And our body mind, part of what it is a receiver that is constantly it is constantly in communication with reality through the electromagnetic spectrum and the quantum world and all of that. Okay, there's information passing back and forth all the time. So the way that the mind functions is whatever I experience, even if I'm out of my body or into an exalted state of consciousness, it comes back, and that the experience is consciously there or the vibration is there, and the mind does what it does. It starts to render that experience into its known world. This is like this is like this, it puts it all together. Okay. And that process includes what we call reification, which is elements are turned into concepts. All right. White is a concept. Blue sky is a concept. Two top concepts, maybe, you know. So we don't think of things in that way that, oh, these are concepts, but they're constructs, you know. And so the mind turns it, reifies it, turns it into concepts, and then remembers the concepts, okay, and stores them. And so then my my misidentification with being this construct, okay, allows that construct to say, oh, I've had this spiritual experience. Okay. And my narcissism can use that now to say I'm special. Then I can go on this whole thing of I need the narcissistic supplies to support my specialness, to work that.
So narcissism survives because of the mind's reification tendencies. What I had imagined prior to getting on this call with you, as I was thinking about it this week, like why does it survive essential realization and development? I had it in mind that it was to do with the pearl. So it's to do with, so a person may be realized, but if they hadn't developed the pearl, then the narcissistic tendencies continue. But it's not that at all by the sounds of it. It's what you were saying. The mind's tendency to reify is the biggest sort of issue.
Yeah, well, the point, true identity, and the pearl, the personal essence. Okay? Uh, one of those can be developed and the other not. This one could be developed and this one not. They can both be developed or not developed. So you get these, and then there's a spectrum. So there's a blending of the whole thing. But then you get into some pretty esoteric teachings of the Diamond Approach when you start studying things like the Diamond Pearl, which is about the synthesis of these two things. What's that?
Oh,
To live from your true identity and be in the world as the ripened personal essence, or the pearl beyond price.
mm, mm. I don't see how narcissistic traits, tendencies can survive that particular development.
Again, it all gets reified and conceptualized. If I continue to live in the world of concepts and images about things and memory about things, this is why uh, you know I can't get through 30 minutes without using a word like shit or something. I mean, that's my
That's all right.
or whatever. But uh, to reach a point where it's like my super ego or that mental activity, all of that, I no longer really try to separate out the superego from the mental activity. It's just part of mental activity. You can see that element of it, but the superego is always involved in the other mentation that's going on. It's just this cascade of blah 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 blah. You know, I was going to say that shit doesn't matter to me, but it's interesting. There's all kinds of interesting things that happen. You know, but I'm no longer totally confused about I'm going to find the keys to existence over there. No, the keys to existence, are right here. The doorway's right here, you know. And if you're using the Enneagram properly, it's going to help you land in the seat you need to be in to really open the thing up, you know. But if I'm using the Enneagram to spool this up more and more and more, you know, enjoy the ride.
I have a few other questions here, but I'm picking and choosing because it could just go on and on. But something this Enneagram and narcissism researcher was claiming was that the dominant instinct patterns the form of narcissism, which I really agree with, noticing my own narcissistic manifestations. They don't so much revolve around the seeking mirroring from people, but something that comes up every single day that feels very narcissistic to me is I go out running, and if someone's in my way, there's an extreme, there's no empathy in that moment. It's like, get out of my way, you're in my way. I know that you're not a big fan of dicing things up to minutiae, and we've spoken before how you're not that into the subtypes part of the Enneagram. But yeah, what comes up as I talk about that, John? Do you think that's true that
Well, I think it's
the
interesting to look at it in terms of the sexual subtype. I mean, you know, it is the sexual subtype because it is about you as the individual. But there's an animalistic part of it too, that has to do with territory,
mm,
instinctual territory. And
can you
and there's the social part too, with, you know, in this relationship, from the view of my narcissism, in this relationship, this path is mine and you're trespassing, you know.
mm, mm. Yeah. Oh, okay. So you're saying you could look at that as particular manifestation from the perspective of each of the instincts.
Sure. And I think that's one of the undervalued and realm of working with the Enneagram, which is being so fixated on our fixation, on my type. We're all these types. And if you want to pick things apart or get the nuance, it's like looking at a situation and and seeing these different elements, but not necessarily thinking that you can put Humpty Dumpty together with all those things. All of those things, all those elements, all the connections, the minutia, the way it's supposed to work is that is helping to bring you closer and closer to the phenomenological experience of what you are, what you really are, what's happening here. Right? So the way that it gets misused, and again supports narcissism, is I'm using all that minutia to support the reification and objectification of me as this constructed self. Mhm. And that's, there's a woman out there, I forget her name. I haven't read her book, but she comes at the Enneagram. She's written a book on, well, there is a person that wrote a book on the Enneagram and object relations, and it may be the same person that I was in a discussion group listening to her that was talking about phenomenology and that is the key to it all. So there are people out there working with these different elements, okay, and I just don't know really the depth of their understanding or connection to that, but regardless, they're moving in the right direction. They're getting under the hood of this thing we call personality.
I'm reminded to let people know that John is teaching the Diamond Approach, and he's also taking new students or accepting new students. So I want to say that, as you can all, as anyone listening would gather, John's a really good teacher. Like lots of, I don't know, John, what is your superpower as a teacher? I think there are a few, but there's a lot of the discrimination in the head. Like I think of it as like red in the head.
Right in the head.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have a superpower, but I could check in with my narcissistic self. It probably a few things.
Yeah, let's hear it. Let's hear from it. So let's as we both acknowledge, we've all got that. So
Well, the eight. And actually, this is probably an interesting thing uh, because it brings in the Enneagram and it brings in uh, ego development and also being. Uh, the eight has a great capacity for tolerance because they're they have a theme, a characterological theme, dynamic around intensity because they're so armored up. It takes intensity to get through things. But that shows up in my history like being the last man standing. Like we could hold this conversation and maybe around midnight tonight you go, I got to get some sleep, and I'd be going, hey, we're just getting started. We just like, this is really exciting. I'm all jazzed. I can't sleep. Let's talk some more. Okay? So I have history with that, of wearing people out. you know and I have history of using that to wear people out for different things to get my way, right? Well, there's a capacity that develops with that, of not just tolerance, but a capacity for things like patience and being with something, and not having that totally serve the personality or the ego. So one of the things that I see that you could put in the realm of, in the positive column around being a teacher, is a capacity for presence, just being present, just, you know, like And with this work on the superego, and most teachers have a fairly good facility with this of non-judgment. Like,
Mm.
okay, so that's what you're experiencing. That's what you believe. What I'm interested in, how's that experience forming you? Not, we don't have to decide if it's good or bad. Get that out of the room and just have the experience and let's explore it.
Mm. Yeah. It's interesting you say that actually, because throwing my teacher under the road a bit here, but I have felt I was projecting some judgment in our last session. I told him something pretty vile, to be fair, some sort of vile. Four has lots of hatred, as we've spoken about before, and I think he winced at one point when I told him what I was imagining doing to someone. But
I think
I
that's
was.
great. I think that's great. And what I would do is, okay, I would want to get the person out of it, and I
Mm,
want to get you into the hatred, the direct experience with the hatred. Like what feels so good about that? What's that do to you that it's like, you know, because let's face it, it's quite enjoyable, when we're about taking that person off the planet. No.
yeah, it can be. It definitely can be. It's definitely powerful.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, but I can imagine eight teachers have a little more capacity for that sort of
I don't
that
know.
sort of yeah. Let's wrap. I really liked this tour of narcissism, and there's lots of threads I'll be wanting to follow up on. But thank you for listening. If you have been listening, what else do I want to say? Interact. Feel free to leave a comment or a question for more likely for John than me. Um, Yeah, John, thank you for your time. Thank you for your time. Seriously, I think I don't know whether all eights are generous, but I certainly experienced that with the eight teachers that I've interacted with and friends. It's probably coming from that same, I want to say, like abundance of energy. What do you think? What's the source of the generosity of the eight, John?
Source of everything, you know, being has no bottom. Why not just give it away? Give it away,
Mm.
give it away, you know. They can't help but make the world a merrier and better place.
There you go. Yep. All right, that's us, I guess, for this week.
Oh,
Thank you, John. Thank you, John.